Whoa, whoa. Hey, and welcome to the first edition of That Coffee Sound Off. I just want to get right into it. Today I'm going to do an analysis of the fiction novel The Illuminati by Larry Burkett. This is a great novel, first published in 1991, and it's a fiction novel about a secret society infiltrating the US government and taking it down, and eventually creating something called the One World Order, where everything, the entire country, or sorry, the entire world is ruled by a world government and all this sort of stuff. We've heard this conspiracy a bunch of times before, but this book is a fiction, and it came to me a long time ago, and it's a very interesting book. I've used it as a guide for a number of years, and I could never quite get the events in the book to line up with real life events, but I actually think I finally have done that, and I think we've reached a point in society where I can actually finally do that. Essentially, my theory here is that this book parallels what's happening right now in real life, in current events. I think the book was written purposely to sort of foreshadow what's going on now, as a sort of way to give us a heads up. And I mean, come on, the book is literally entitled The Illuminati. How could I not possibly think this when the entire storyline is about, the US government being taken down and the One World Order going up with their electronic currency and everybody taking the mark and all this sort of stuff. So I'd like to quickly do a very quick analysis on page 48, chapter 5. This chapter is called The Election. It goes into a very quick rundown of what's a sort of a timeline of the lead up to the year in this book where everything takes place, which is 2001. But in my theory, I think that the years in this book are actually 20 years behind where they are now. So for instance, when this book refers to 1994, my theory is if you add 20 years to that, you would get 2014. And I believe what they say happened in 1994 actually happened in our life, in this real life, in 2014. So it kind of goes like that, and I'm going to give you a quick rundown of a few dates that it mentions, and I'm going to draw some parallels, and it's up to you, to decide if I'm just crazy or not, or if there really is something here. The very first one, it starts out in 1994. I'll pull out a quote out of this book, just one sentence, and then we can sort of analyze it. And here's the sentence. And the recession of 1994 had been tempered by massive government spending. And keep in mind, they're talking about a recession here that led up to a depression. And the depression sort of started in 2001, and the recession led up to it in the 7 years prior. So if in here it says 1994, if we add 20 years to that to go with my little theory, we would get 2014. And so let's sub 2014 into the sentence and see if this matches our current circumstance right now. Okay, here we go. And the recession of 2014 had been tempered by massive government spending. So here we are. It is now 2015, and we are in a recession. Some people say we're not, other people say we are. I would say with the government slowing down, the fact that there's 94 million people out of work, that we're definitely in a recession. So that's an interesting kind of parallel. I'll pull out another one. By the year 1995, nearly half of all businesses in America were owned by the Japanese. Now, this is an interesting one because I think he has a couple things in here that are sort of in code. First off, 1995, if you add 20 years to that, you get 2015. And that's our current year. And so he says we could sub it in, and that would say, by the year 2015, nearly half of all businesses in America were owned by the Japanese. Now this is interesting because you can say, well, that's not true. Now what if you took the Japanese and subbed in the Chinese for that? And so we'd have, by the year 2015, nearly half of all businesses in America were owned by the Chinese. And there is a lot of truth to that. I could go through a ton of different articles, but I just picked this one out. I did a really quick Google search. Actually, I literally searched for China U.S. debt holdings and came up with this article, Time magazine, September 21st, so just a few weeks ago. Let's face it, China runs U.S. monetary policy now. And there's a million examples in here and other articles about how China has essentially started buying up a lot of real estate and a lot of property in the United States, as well as a lot of businesses. Heck, even the Rockefeller Center is now Chinese owned. So there is a lot of truth to this statement, and when this was written, back in the late 80s, I don't know if that was the case. So it's an interesting leap that he would say that in 2015, in our real world, nearly half of all businesses in America were owned by the Japanese, i.e. the Chinese. And this is an interesting scenario. I certainly doubt you can say, well, 50% of American businesses are owned by the Chinese. But we certainly know that a lot of our country is now owned by the Chinese. So I thought that was quite interesting. And I guess the final one that we could get into, though there's a lot more, but I don't want to make this too long. The final one, I'll pick this sentence out and then we can analyze it really quickly. The day of reckoning began in January of 1996 when the Saudis announced that they were running out of oil and would be raising their base price by $50 a barrel. Now, if we add 20 years to that, we have 2016, specifically January of 2016. We obviously haven't gotten there, but it is quite interesting that in the last 6 months, oil has taken a huge nosedive and has sort of come to the forefront of the global chessboard, and the fight for oil and U.S. production versus production in the Middle East versus production in Russia. I mean, essentially, so many things lately have all been sort of based around oil and natural gas, and essentially it's been one gigantic game of risk out there. And now we have Russia going up against the U.S. and Syria, and they're sort of using Syria as a proxy to sort of go at this, Russian versus U.S. type of thing. We got Putin on the world stage basically saying that the U.S. has completely screwed up the Middle East and they've brought it into complete chaos and he needs to do something about it. And he certainly has done something about it in the last few days with epic amounts of bombing, basically wiped out ISIS and other rebels entirely. So it's sort of interesting what's happening. But anyway, I just wanted to run that down. We don't know what's going to happen in January. I just thought I might give you a heads up. Perhaps the Saudis will double the price of oil. I mean, it's come down, like I say, it's come down about half of what it was in the last few years. And there's been simply a slowdown in global demand. And the Saudi Arabians are unwilling to let up on oil production. And so the price of oil seems to stay in the $40 to $50 range, and it's been doing that for a considerably long time. So I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen with this. We know that Russia and Saudi Arabia have been making deals, and Saudi Arabia for sure is getting out of the petrodollar. In fact, even this article right here, is Saudi Arabia losing the oil price war, kind of talks about, Saudi Arabia's oil production and what's going on there. And, it's sort of kind of relating this back to, could they possibly double the price of oil in a few months? I mean, this very well could happen. They have been driving the U.S. shale production and the U.S. shale producers out of business. So they're trying to bump out U.S. oil production. And who knows? I mean, with all the chaos going in the Middle East now, a scenario very well could happen in a few months where they do decide to double the price of oil. And in that case, we would see a quick collapse of the United States. And so, yeah, there's a lot more to this in this collapse scenario that he talks about, and we can do a part 2 of that if you guys are entertained. But anyway, I thought I would just put this out there and see how you guys would take it, and see if you guys would think that there's anything to this, or if I'm just a crazy person. Alright, so thank you very much, guys, and that's been it for the first edition of That Coffee Soundbite.